In today's kind of somewhat crazy remote hybrid flex world, whatever you want to call it, it's a challenge for leaders to figure out how you're really going to show up. So today I've got a guest who's going to help me dive into that, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I am your host, Doug Thorpe, and yet again today we're going to have a talk that has been, I think, very timely. It's important. I know I deal almost daily with business leaders, company owners, and such that are still wrestling with the question about leading at this flex workforce, hybrid assignments, and people struggling to get back into business the way it used to be. So my guest is a lady named Stacey Ashley. She's joining us today, and she's got a couple of books, and she, like me, is an executive coach specializing in leadership development. So Stacey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Doug.
And tell us where you're calling in from.
Yeah, I'm based in Sydney in Australia. Of course, I travel all over the place now that we're allowed to, but yeah, that's home base for me.
Okay, so we have a little bit of a time zone difference here going on, but thank you for taking the time to jump in and be on with us.
A pleasure.
Yeah. So as we were kind of ramping up to this, Stacey and I were talking about the challenge that leaders face. You know, in the pre-COVID environment, a leader could call a team meeting. He could bring a department together and say whatever that needed to be said from the podium, and or walking the halls, doing the schmoozing you want to do and letting your sort of natural charisma and personality shine through. But a lot of us don't get to do that anymore. So let's kind of start with that. What are some of the challenges, Stacey, that you see going on that leaders are still struggling with at this point in time?
Yeah, there's a few, Doug. I think the obvious ones come with the change in environment, the change of where people are working and the combination of how we work in that environment. So yes, we have people who are still working from home. Yes, we have people who are working flexibly. You know, we have, I think, a lot more flexibility around timing and that sort of thing. So actually getting people together as a single unit, for example, for a team or a business department, presents its challenges now. And so I think as leaders, we have to be more creative and also more open to how we connect with our people. And I think that's really what it comes down to, that connection. We know all the research is telling us that the connection between leaders and teams has really dropped significantly over the last couple of years. And so we have a big opportunity in front of us to reconnect. And communication is part of it. And being a visible leader is part of it. You know, I need to know that you are leading me and that you are, you know, finding a way forward for us, and that you really are there for me as my leader, you know, and I want to trust in your leadership. And so as leaders, we've got to be really conscious and conscientious about that. So it is about communication, different modes of communication. It is also about making sure that what you're doing, people know about. So what you're doing, whether it's, you know, arguing a business case, whether it's creating the vision, all of those sorts of things, that your people are actually aware that those things are going on. Because when you were in the office and they could see you, you know, brainstorming in your office, they knew that was happening. But when you're in different locations, they can't actually see that. And so we've really got to be conscious about letting people know what's going on and what we are in particular as the leader doing to move our business unit, our team and our people forward. And so it is about making sure that, you know, you're really comfortable in all of the mediums. And if that means you need to acquire some new skills to tap into those communication elements, that connection piece, it is more than logging into Zoom. Logging into Zoom is a great start, or Teams, or whatever you use, but it's not enough. You've really got to create the opportunity to connect with your people over those mediums, rather than just simply sort of show up, because showing up in Zoom is sort of like getting to the meeting room door. It's what happens when you go through the door that really matters. And I think it's exactly the same in this hybrid, flexible environment.
Yeah. And just being the creatures we are, you think about some basic social skills, like making eye contact when you're talking. Well, on Zoom, that's really hard because your lens is usually somewhere else around the screen, and you're looking at the person that you have on the screen. You're thinking you want to talk to them, but in reality, you got to be looking into wherever the camera is to have that connection work. And so logistically, it's a challenge. And it's just a quick sidebar on that. And I'm not making a commercial plug here, but I've noticed there are a couple of vendors that have come up with very small micro cameras that you can drop down on your screen and be right in the center of the facial image that's there of the other party you might be talking to. And I'm set up here today, just as an example. I'm looking square in my lens now, but you happen to be just a few inches off center of this camera, and now I'm looking down at the face I see on my screen. So there is a difference. That eye movement is palpable, and often people have that camera incredibly remote away from the screen. And so right there's a disconnect that I think leaders need to be aware of and sensitive to.
Look, totally. And I think the other thing, there are the logistics of how do you get the right setup. And you know what? I think the vendors are going to solve that for us, because they're going to know it's a problem. They already do. And within a fairly short space of time, that will get solved for us. But I think let's also remember the really simple things. A phone call is a wonderful thing. It's very intimate. You do get great connection. So sometimes it's actually about really stripping it back to some of the fundamentals to create connection and to open up the communication. And I think sometimes we know everyone has Zoom fatigue and those sorts of things. So let's keep it simple as leaders. The thing here is, though, that we need to be proactive about how we're creating those opportunities for connection.
Yeah. I tend to be a little more bullish on my folks when I'm talking to leaders and what they're doing. If they start complaining about Zoom fatigue, I just challenge them with the possibility that that's just a convenient excuse. The fact that some psychologist or sociologist has given it a name, that it is a real thing. I'm not minimizing that, but I think it can become a convenient excuse. And you said a magic word in my book. I think one of the big attributes that leaders really need to work on for upping their game in this hybrid life we're living now is communication. And I've gone on record in multiple places, and I'll say it again. I think a couple of years from now, when we start hearing and reading all the case studies of businesses that thrived during the pandemic, the leadership attribute most dominant, I think, will be communication. I think that's going to be the differentiating factor. And leaders that sort of minimize that by saying, it's just not my style, it's just not my thing, well, shame on you. It needs to be your thing. You need to get out there.
Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. And in fact, it was exactly that, leaders' reticence to, for example, bring their leadership team together. Oh, we can't do a face-to-face leadership offsite, therefore we won't do one at all because I'm not at my best as the MD or the CEO online. Well, that's just not, that doesn't cut it, right? You have to find a way. And so that's actually what really initiated the idea of my book, You're on Mute, because if you are not being proactive, if you are not showing up in an online and hybrid space as a leader, then you're not leading, and you are actually on mute because no one can hear and see your visible leadership. And so you're right, that excuse of, I'm better face-to-face than I am online just doesn't wash. The world has changed. It will never go back. And so we need to recognize as leaders, we've got to get more equipment in our toolkit so we can be proficient in all of the different environments that we need to lead in.
Yeah. So, well, what are some of the other areas apart from communication that you're finding that people need help with?
I think, there's some basics, Doug, like setting clear boundaries. When do I, and that could be around time. When am I available for work, or when do I intend to work? And helping our people to do the same thing, so that work doesn't become, taking over the whole of life. And I think also making sure that the environment that supports our work, wherever we're working from, that it actually supports what we do. We have the right tools, we have the right equipment, we have enough space. We're not, balancing our laptop on our knee, trying to read and write a report and all of those sorts of things. Let's make sure we actually set ourselves up for success. And these are really basic things, but they certainly get in the way if they're not, at least there's not some foundations to support our great work. I think self-care is a big one. Leaders have been incredibly generous over the last few years, supporting the people around them, making great change, leading, fairly significant, programs of change and transformation that have just been necessary, on top of, the usual things that they would need to do. And I think the opportunity to recover from that hasn't really presented itself. And so I think that there's a really important need for leaders to be proactive in actually replenishing their own energy and setting sort of a sustainable way forward to continue to lead this sort of marathon of change. Because if they don't do it, of course, we know burnout is a real thing and it will happen. And we've got lots of people that are approaching it if they're not already there. And so let's actually, take some personal responsibility for how we feel and how we show up. What else? I think the other thing that's really important is the relationship between employees and their organizations has changed. And so the expectation that I have as an employee of my organization and of my leaders has changed significantly, because I've reevaluated where work and how work fits with the rest of my life. And so the employee experience is, I think, becoming really important, even more important than it already was. And the experience they have of their leader is becoming, an even bigger factor on, do I like my work? Do I love my work? Do I like working for this organization? Do I want to stay? Am I prepared to put in, my discretionary effort? All of those things. And so as leaders, clearly we have a big responsibility in how we deliver that employee experience and how we respond to those expectations, or get clear with our people about what the mutual expectations are. And so I think, that's a big piece for leaders, because we know people are reevaluating and they will leave leaders who don't step up.
Right. Right. You packed a lot into that, and several things that come to my mind. I've talked with many executives that are describing in situations where they've done a partial return to work, and so now they are meeting face to face in conference type areas. The tone and tenor of what's being discussed, they've described it as a new level of entitlement and empowerment. And often in management leadership, when we talk about entitlement, it's always a negative word, and I don't mean it that way, but there is a kind of a boldness about the workforce showing back up, basically saying, boss, we used to do it this way, but I really want to talk about an alternative. I really want to explore what else. And they may not say it as directly as that, but that's what they're acting. That's how they're acting out. And managers and leaders are challenged by that, to say the least. And it's a palpable feel that they've got for the teams that are coming back together.
Yeah, it's interesting, but I think also it's an opportunity. Let's have those conversations rather than, just assuming we can change things. Sometimes we have to talk about it so we can find the best way forward. I think there's also a huge opportunity for leaders to be coaching and mentoring, because if we're working in these flexible environments and things have changed, then if our employees, our people, if they want the opportunity that these changes have created, then they also must take the responsibility to deliver on their promise as well. And so let's coach people so that we all get a great outcome from that, because I think the opportunity is there to do that.
Yeah. The other thing you touched on is the idea of setting some boundaries, building some personal resilience into your view of your daily work life. And no doubt in my mind, and everywhere I've gone during these last 2.5, almost 3 years now, it's very obvious. The one big thing that happened is people sort of lost the boundaries between home life and work life. And maybe I look at it too simplistically, but for those that were making the traditional daily commute to work, whether that was train, bus, transit, or personal car, there was a break point. You woke up in the morning, you got ready, you went through that portal of transportation, whatever it might be, to get to work. And there was a mental shift that happened, and you focused on your work. And then at the end of the day, you reversed all of that and went home, and there was that other shift. Now, because of technology, did we take work home? Yes. But did we abuse that privilege like we do now? And I think people have, by and large, they're well-intended and good meaning. They rationalize saying, from 9 to 10 this morning, I need to take care of the kids because my spouse needs to go do something else. So I'm taking a break in my day and I'm going to do my parent thing. But that creates a kind of a guilt, and there's an accounting of that hour saying, well, I'm going to tack that on at the end after the kids are in bed. I'm going to go make up that hour. So the work is getting done, but the boundaries are totally blurred.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. I think that again, it comes down to expectations. Let's talk about, what's the measure of your role? Is it the number of hours you do? And it may be. Is it the output? What is it? And what's the expectation, so that we're all clear? And the expectation needs to consider what's reasonable and how do I integrate the other parts of my life. I think what we've seen, though, is that, as you said, the commute for some people has disappeared, but it's been absorbed into the workday. So rather than getting that extra time back to use in a really productive, fun, whatever way, it hasn't. It's been absorbed into the workday. And so I think a lot of it just comes down to being really conscious, and again, taking responsibility for how do you balance or integrate the different parts of your work and life in a way that's supportable, sustainable, achieves the outcomes, ticks all the boxes, but you don't have work just bleed into all areas of your life and you're in this always on kind of state, because I think that's where the danger lies, is that you're always on and you never have relief from work. And that to me is probably the big thing. I know there are a few exceptions of, some amazing entrepreneurs who are always on because that's just their thing. But for most people, they need to do other things. They need to focus on other things. They need to replenish. And so I think the boundary setting is about when are you on and when are you not on for work.
Well, and to that end, as you just make those decisions and be intentional about that planning and programming and organization, if you're leading a team of people, you need to be vocal and obvious about the decisions and choices you make and model that behavior so that others feel the latitude to do similar things. And just taking for instance, if you say, all right, every half day on Friday afternoon, I'm not going to have any meetings, or maybe the whole day on Friday, I'm not going to call any meetings of our team. I want you to be able to take a personal day or, make up however you want to use it. We're just not going to encumber the day with meetings. Well, the boss needs to turn around and demonstrate that and, not not accept meetings or try to do what they can to socialize that up the chain and make that happen. Because it's one thing if the boss says, well, here's a classic I got. One executive I had said that he chose to do some catch up work after dinner, while the kids were getting ready for bed. What that meant, for 30 minutes, there was a flood of outgoing emails. Well, 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, these emails are landing in employees' boxes, his team members' boxes. It's coming from the boss. They better work the answer, and the boss finally had to say, look, let me back up a minute. Here's how I've organized my day. I'm clearing out my inbox at that time. If I haven't been specific telling you of exactly when I need an answer, it can wait. Let it roll into your next day. Don't overreact because I happen to put a PM stamp on it at 7, 8 o'clock at night. And oftentimes that's easier said than done. Everybody typically has a relationship with the boss. It's like, yeah, right. Okay, no, I'm going to answer it. I'm going to try to get it taken care of. So you've got to work that dynamic. And I think good leaders will make it happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. Really being clear about what's expected and not expected, and then modeling it. But this to me talks to the always on mentality. They would only know that they had those emails if they had their device and they were checking it at 7:30 or 8 at night. So is that reasonable? Is that part of the on time or not? And then, of course, there's the whole fundamental email thing of, just because someone sent you an email doesn't mean you need to be, glued to your device to be able to respond within 5 minutes of it arriving. We've set an incredibly, well, I think it's incorrect, but we've set this expectation or precedent that we have to respond to emails, within minutes of them arriving. Well, actually, we don't.
No.
For most emails, they can wait quite a reasonable amount of time, and checking your email in the morning and in the afternoon is probably enough, depending on your role, of course. But I think, these are the things when I talk about boundaries and expectations, that's part of it. What's a reasonable response time for an email? You're not, waiting, hovering, hoping that an email is going to land in your inbox so you can instantly respond to it. So let's actually get some reasonableness into us, because you've got a lot of other things to do as well as respond to email.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, Stacey, we're going to take a short commercial break. And when we get back, we're going to dive a little more into both of your books and talk about some of these models and ideas for leaders. We'll be right back after this message.
Business is all about solving complex problems as fast as you can create them. Become the best problem solver by leading others to greatness too. And the first step is going to DougThorpe.com. Doug Thorpe is known globally for coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders, improving their performance and the work output of everyone surrounding them. You can find health, wealth, and happiness by learning to lead others to health, wealth, and happiness. Go to DougThorpe.com now and order Doug's books or hire him to coach your managers. That's Doug, THORPE.com.
All right, everyone, we're back. You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm Doug Thorpe, and today I'm talking with Stacey Ashley, who's calling us from the great continent of Australia. And it's a pleasure. We've been having a good discussion about I guess some people would call it the brave new world of work and the way we're going at things, having gone through the experience of the pandemic. While we were in the green room during the break, Stacey brought up a good point that I'm going to paraphrase what she was telling me, and I'll let her elaborate. But on one hand, there's nothing new under the sun. Some of the challenges of leadership that are in front of us today have always been there. They're no different today than they once were. We are working through those problems with some new challenges, but the fundamental problem, I guess I'll call it, from a leadership standpoint, is the same as it's always been. So, Stacey, you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the focus of leadership and the important attributes of leadership and the breadth of leadership, I really think is largely the same. What the pandemic experience has done for us is probably to shine a light on some of the things that, although they've always been there in leadership, have perhaps not had the prominence that they might have. And so, and there are other things which have always presented challenge. And again, it's sort of amplified that. So if we've already talked about communication. Communication has always been important. It's always been, or in many cases has also been an area of lack, if you like, in leadership and organizations. How do I communicate? How often do I communicate? How do I communicate well? The pandemic has just meant that that's even more important, because we got thrown into this kind of maelstrom of things that happened all at the same time. And so how do we help people to cope with that? Well, we've got to keep them informed, and we've got to keep them connected to us, and that's all about communication. But the things that I think have become clearly more important, although they have always been part of leadership, are the elements of kindness, compassion, empathy, because we have been a world in need of all of that over the last couple of years. And so while I've always certainly considered that leaders need to, to have those attributes and to be able to focus on those things, I think now the expectation that leaders need to do that generally has risen significantly. And to balance out those things with, all the standards of set the vision, make great decisions, balance the balance sheet, all of those there's not, and now I guess a greater expectation of humanity in leadership, if I could put it like that. So it's always been there, but now I think it's much more conscious, that we want our leaders to demonstrate those things in addition to everything else.
Yeah. I think I have actually gone so far as to tell people, I think one style of leadership that's been around for decades is the classic command and control. I go so far as to argue I think that's on its way out. I don't honestly know of an environment where that is really working anymore. And somebody always, if I have this discussion, they'll quickly point to me, well, the military still uses it. And I'll go, no, do they? Have you really studied military leadership training of late? It's not. It's servant leadership is their mantra. And I've got that well documented from the Command and General Staff College. And so this my way or the highway kind of, I've got pearl handled pistols on my hip, you're going to have to follow me. Well, that is so many decades ago. And those that might still be out there in the workforce with that mindset, all I say is good luck to you. I hope you have a team that likes that and is used to it, because you're not going to have a lot of success recruiting new people to come into that system.
Yeah, I don't really think there's a future there. And I think that command and control style has been on the way out for a long time. Again, the pandemic experience, I think, has just, accelerated that process because it just is not the most effective, successful, inclusive way of leading people.
Well, it's definitely not a long-term play. It's arguably you can get some short-term success if you've got a real crisis on your hands. If the house is on fire, you want the fire captain to be command and control. Yes, sure. I agree with that. No doubt about it. But the process to build that team on the fire engine that knows how to do that when the fire is happening, that's not a command and control style that gets you there. Sure. So I think there's some caveats, but by and large, for it to be the go-to methodology or solution, I think it's on its way out for sure. What are some of the other areas you've delved into with your books?
So my one of my first books was about that whole transition from being a member of a team to leading one. So really that responsibility, moving the responsibility for task to the responsibility for people and what's involved in making that transition. That was my first book. And then I wrote a book about being a leader. That's called First Lead Yourself. And that was released at the end of 2020, actually. And that was really about again, recognizing that leadership starts with you, and it's not just knowing what to do, it's actually embodying it and being a leader, because you're always role modeling. And people know when you talk the talk but you don't walk the walk, they know that. And so the being of leadership. And then at the beginning of I actually wrote 3 books in 2021. The first one I released was called Show Up 21, and it was really a very simple book designed to give leaders a way to lead out of what we thought then was probably, the pandemic coming to a close, but giving them some equipment that allowed them to continue to show up in a sustainable way in their leadership and be equipped with some core ideas that would help them to have the right kind of energy, to maintain the right kind of mindset that would allow them to lead that kind of marathon of change. Still super relevant today, as it turns out. And then I wrote You're on Mute and Power Up, and released those in December 21. So a bit of a breadth, I guess, but it's all premised on, for me, the concept of leading possibility, which is about, as a leader, it's not holding a position on an organisation chart. It's actually about the opportunity we create to lead into the future.
I agree. The the whole idea of whatever your role title on the org chart is, I always caution people that inevitably when you're placed in one of those positions, there is an implied and a specific level of power that comes with that. You usually technically have hiring and firing kind of power. And other things as well. And maybe, monetarily, you've got some kind of delegation of authority to sign checks and things like that. But the best leaders I've ever known use that power of the position as an absolute last resort, if they even ever use that. Rather, they are looking for their own leadership ability to create the proper level of authority and assertion that they need to influence the people around them. So it's not about, and just because you have that title, and in my early days, I came from a military background. It wasn't about the little emblem on your collar that gave you the power, although a lot of people occasionally tended to use it that way, but rather it was the way you conducted yourself that created the respect and admiration that you wanted to get from your unit and from the people around you. And sometimes that meant taking the shirt off altogether and just going and sitting and having a talk about what you're trying to accomplish and where you're trying to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, we've all seen leaders who don't have position at all, but the way they show up allows them to have influence and to make an impact and to make a difference. And they may not have any positional authority whatsoever. And I'm a huge advocate of developing leadership in everyone.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I often refer to that as the informal, I'll get that out. Let me start over. The informal organization. You can look at that legal and formal org chart that might be in the book or on the wall, but when you really get into a business, you start asking, well, how do things really happen? And then you'll be introduced to people that are very influential and very, actually, ultimately, I would use the word powerful. They're respected, they're admired, they're the go-to people that everybody learns to lean on and count on. So you're right. Leadership can take a lot of different forms. What do you do in terms of helping someone who is in a designated leadership position, but who has never kind of crossed over into that coaching sort of mode where they're actually working to build leaders in their own organization? What kind of things do you work with in that front?
Yeah, well, I think I teach them to coach. That's probably the main thing. But really, actually, I think that it starts with the recognition that whenever you as the leader are when you're the go-to person, when you're the expert, when you have the answers, when you make all the decisions, then you're really limiting the capacity of your team to one, which is you. And as a leader, does that create the great outcomes and the difference that we want? Well, most people would recognize that as no. Actually, they want to make a bigger difference and a bigger impact. And that's about actually tapping into all the amazing talent around them. And so for me, it's about raising that awareness and getting the penny to drop that in order for me to do that as a leader, then I need to have a way of tapping into that. And coaching and mentoring obviously creates huge opportunity to build capability and to build accountability and to really move the dial. So in 6 months' time, we've all made progress together. And so, you know, as they say, rising tide lifts all boats. And so that's what we want to create is that, you know, opportunity for everyone to really step into their strengths and realize their potential. And I think the big relief that comes from that as the leader is all of a sudden you don't need to know the answer to everything. Oh my gosh, that feels so good. As long as I know the questions to ask, then I'm still leading. I'm creating the opportunity, but I don't actually need to be the expert of everything. And I think that's when you know, that innovation, that creativity, that opportunity, that's when it starts to flow, is that we ask rather than tell. And yeah, it takes a while to become really proficient at that, and to also be comfortable letting go of being the expert. I think that's a big transition point for many leaders. You know, I know that there are many leaders, even very, very senior leaders, who still operate from their base of domain expertise rather than their base of leadership expertise. And so I think when we can get leaders, or certainly when I can get leaders to recognize that and then take steps to achieve that, that's when we see that real elevation in leadership and opportunity for the team as a whole.
Yeah, I see a pretty regular pattern, or call it trajectory or evolution of how leaders emerge in companies. You know, it starts with getting recognized for your individual contribution. You get a chance to take on a team lead kind of role. You do okay with that. Maybe you become the department manager, and then you do okay with that, and you become some kind of unit manager, and so on and so on. But the irony, and where people typically get tripped up, is that they get a false sense of security that they got recognized for those early promotions because they were doers, they were problem solvers. So even if they took on a team 1 or 2 levels deep, there were still problems being generated from the effort in that team. And this person was the chief problem solver. So accolades and recognition come, and that's how they usually get, you know, into the radar and consideration for greater elevation. But at some point, there's a dynamic where even the company needs a more strategic influencer, not just a doer. Absolutely. And that's where people start to crumble in mid-career. They perhaps don't get told that that's the transition that's happening. They're feeling pressure from above that they're being asked to do those things, but maybe they haven't been coached on how to do that or what that's about. So they revert to their comfort zone of problem solving, and they try to dive into bigger problems to solve. And it becomes very counterproductive, because every minute they're spending on the problem solving, they're not doing the strategic work they're being asked to do. And all of a sudden we have this sort of double bind of people waking up mid-career going, what's happening to me?
Yeah. Look, I think you're absolutely right. And I see it still too often. And it's almost shocking to me, because why would you promote someone and then not give them exposure to the information, the knowledge, the expectation, the training to help them be successful? You know, I think there's a real lack still. I mean, there are some organizations that are amazing and they're very focused on their leadership pipeline and equipping their people and giving them opportunity, but supporting them every step of the way. And I think that's amazing. But I don't think it happens in enough organizations. And you're right. We promote and sort of we promote until failure. almost. And it's like, oh, how did that happen? Well, it happened because you didn't give them the right support and equipment and training and coaching and mentoring along the way. If you'd done that, they would be making that next transition to the broader portfolio, the bigger vision, the more strategic, getting out of the detail. You can't just expect it and not actually help people to be able to do it because you've given them the skills. And I think that that's a real opportunity in so many organizations to recognize that in order for people to be successful, you've got to equip them with the right equipment. I was reading an interesting article, I think it was from DDI, some of their research that they did in 2021, where 75% of CEOs were saying we have to have a robust leadership talent pipeline. And less than 11% of those CEOs said, yes, we're actively doing something about creating one, which means we don't have one.
Right.
That's pretty scary.
Right. Yeah. No, it is. And I think it's one of those classic arguments. When challenged about it, the senior leaders agree it needs to be there and ought to be there, and it should be part of their framework and structure. But then you say, well, okay, great. What are you doing about it? It's like, well, we hadn't gotten to that one yet. And I definitely see that happening a lot. Well, Stacey, I think we need to land this plane. This has been great. Is there any kind of summary closing thought you want to share with everybody before we get offline here?
Oh my gosh, so much, but let's keep it simple. I think let's go back to the concept of, I think everyone has an opportunity to be a leader, even if you're a leader of self. And I think, pick up that responsibility and lead from wherever you are, and the more that you can learn about that and contribute, then I think you're simply making the world a better place. And I think that's a wonderful thing to do.
I love it. And I happen to agree with you 100%. It's a need that's out there, and whether that leadership is applied at work or at home or in your community, there are plenty of opportunities to stand up and be that person that can be counted on in the moment to make a difference. And that's really what it's all about. So thank you for all this, Stacey. Tell everybody the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more.
Well, thank you, Doug. You can find me on LinkedIn as Stacey Ashley, and my website is staceyashley.com.
Great. We'll have those links in the show notes, folks. And speaking of that, if you're listening to this episode on your favorite streaming channel, we do have a video version that's over on YouTube under the channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. I hope you've enjoyed this episode and found something helpful for your own leadership toolkit and development strategy. If you need to know more, reach out to Stacey or reach out to me, and we'll be happy to dive in, give you a hand with it. For now, we're going to sign off, say goodbye, and thank you for listening.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.